Hi everyone! Today I'm making a short introductory to colour theory. It's something that's hugely important in a painter's work, but I feel it gets skimmed over a lot in school. I know I certainly didn't grasp the concept back then, and it wasn't until later on when I really went and studied it myself, and especially when I saw the work of the Impressionists, that the penny dropped. So I hope today I can take you through the progress of choosing my palette before I start to paint, which is something I often do to think of the colours before I start work. And I've got a fresh piece on the easel, so I'm going to take you through how I chose some of my palette for this before I begin and show you that using the beautiful photo reference that I'll be working from. So I hope you find this helpful. Enjoy the video. I'm going to assume that you know absolutely nothing about colour theory and start from the beginning. So first things first, the colour wheel. This is based on red, yellow and blue, the three primary colours. Next are the secondary colours, green, orange and purple. And these come from mixing the primary colours together. But in between those come tertiary colours, and these happen when you mix a primary colour with a secondary colour. And you get yellow-orange, red-orange, red-purple, blue-purple, blue-green and yellow-green. And this gives us a 12-part colour wheel. But how can this be used to create colour harmony in your work? And this is what I wondered for many years, knowing about the colour wheel but not really knowing how to apply that. So I recommend that you go and read up more on colour theory, as it really does open up a whole world to you within your art. But I'll show you a few examples here, and then more importantly how I apply this in my own work. So the easiest colour scheme on the colour wheel is simply using the opposite colours, known as complementary colours. These colours naturally zing next to each other. You'll commonly find them in nature, especially in an object's shadow, and I use the complementaries in a lot of my work, which you'll see later. Next I'll mention analogous colours. These are colours that are beside each other on the wheel. This is often found in nature too. One perfect example of where I use this in my work would be in foliage or green bushes and trees. Some leaves will be hit by the light while some will face away from the light, so I will need my main green plus a cooler blue-green and a warmer yellow-green. So this helps me choose three colours that will go nicely but also give the effect of light and shade. Next I'll mention the triadic colour scheme, and this is using three colours evenly placed around the wheel. So there are loads of these variations, and I know several amazing artists who really plan their colours based on a lot of knowledge. I must admit that when I learnt the basics and grasped how I could make use of that, I tend to rely on my instincts a lot of the time now, and I don't get totally obsessed by this. So a couple of final things to say about colour before I take you through choosing the palette for my next painting. Firstly, we can split the colour wheel into cool and warm colours. I've mentioned the importance of being able to judge the temperature of a colour, as it's one of the two bits of analysis I do when I'm choosing the right colour to use. The second question I ask about colour is whether it's a tint, a shade or a tone. So the colour wheel here, as you see it, is pure hues only. And we get all the other colours by adding either white, black or grey. So if we add white to a colour, we get a tint. If we add black, it's called a shade. And if we add grey, it's called a tone. So here, for example, I'm going to take a tint of yellow and a tint of the purple. And I know if I use these two light tints in, for example, a white dog in sunlight, I'll create a more convincing 3D effect, as nature too uses the complementary opposites in light and shadow. So over to my lovely photo reference now, and this is actually a great example of a photo to talk about colour theory with. Just straight off, the first thing that hits me is the blue and also the orange as a contrast to that. So the majority of the background, the water, and even areas on the dog, there's very much a feeling of that blue and orange contrast. So I'm thinking that's going to be the main complementary colours that I use throughout the piece. But then also when I look at the dog itself, there is a lovely area of sunlight here and also of the tail. And I'm also seeing a lot of yellowy tones in the dog's coat. So I know that I'm going to also find a lot of lilac tones in the shadow areas. So that already tells me 4 main colour groups that I'm going to choose. So I'll start with the lightest and work my way to the dark tones. First of all, my use of pure white is going to be very limited, and I'm going to point out some of the areas here where I can see pure white, and it's not that many for a light coloured dog like this. So I'm really only seeing the brightest areas here on the dog, and maybe some specks throughout this water splash, but really not many. When you compare the very brightest area, say here on the tail, to some of these foamy areas, there really is quite a difference in how dark the foam bits are in comparison to that bright tail being hit by the light. So pure white will get used, but very sparingly, just on those places that I want to really highlight. The yellowy tones in the dog's coat, in the sunlit areas you get little mixtures of yellow hues, ones with more orange in it. I'll list the full colour list that I've chosen to begin this painting underneath in the description, so you can have a look at the exact colours I've chosen. But if you imagine that these are lighter tints from our earlier colour wheel, then you could say that these might be analogous colours next to each other in the colour wheel, but lighter tints. So I'm going to use combinations of this throughout these lighter areas in the coat. But then when you contrast this with the shadow area, I'm going to look for shadow tones which have a lot of lilac in them, maybe something like this. And also a lot of blue tones, so a lot of the blue that I use throughout the background in the sea will also come into the dog's coat. I mean, if you actually look at this middle area on the dog, it's got a very, very similar colour scheme to the background itself. So it's all to do with those colours being reflected off a light coloured dog. And just to have a quick look at the background itself, when you look in really closely here, you see a lot of these nice vibrant blues, but then the ripples themselves actually have quite a lot of brown earth, something as light as this, even some places as dark as quite a deep brown earth. So the darkest place in the picture is probably here in the foreground, where the dog is casting its shadow on the water, and contrasting that will be all of these water droplets creating that big splash. So I've picked out some deeper browns and darker greys to tackle that darker area. And I'll make use of a lot of my cooler tints, so blue tints and lilac tints like these for the splashes, and I'll probably use some warmer tints for very small highlights of light like grey 27, some bits of white as well. But just from knowing my colour theory, I know that all of that's going to work really nicely together. So I hope this helps you next time you're trying to choose a palette for your painting, and helps you think about creating a bit more harmony within your work. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do remember to subscribe. Lots more videos coming very soon. And a big thanks to all my patrons over on Patreon. Their support is making this all possible. So if you're interested in longer tutorials with narration and colour codes and free photo reference and lots more, check out my Patreon channel.